Hey everyone, Elizabeth here. Today I wanted to talk about Adam Bede by George Eliot. And probably from what I've called this video, you're probably aware that it wasn't really my favorite. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Adam Bede and what I thought of it. So, Adam Bede is George Eliot's first novel, and it was a smash hit when it was published, and it's never been out of print since it was published. So, mine is very much a minority view. I think the general gist I got looking it up online, other people generally thought that it had great characterization, complex characters. It's meant to be a great example of sort of the apotheosis of Victorian realism. People really like George Eliot's philosophical or just sort of interpersonal reflections. People find it very subtle and interesting. And so, if you loved this book and you're watching this aghast, I just want you to know that you're very much in the majority. I'm just going to be talking about my personal gripes, and which are very much not the usual response to this book. This book is mostly beloved. Yeah, but I guess sometimes when you read, you just find yourself just completely out of step with everyone else. I don't really agree with any of those characterizations of the book. And even the things that I liked about the book were not what people liked. So one of the things I did like about the book is I thought it had great pacing, was really easy to read, if maybe a bit unremarkable in the prose. But apparently one of the most common criticisms is that people find it too slow in plotting. So I apparently just had a completely different reaction to this book from everyone else. Which is interesting. I refused to look too deep into what other people said about the book while I was still reading it, and I was very surprised when I looked up and saw what the response was by most other people. And so, yeah, with some authors, I think I find anyway, you spend a lot of the book just feeling angry that you can't talk back to them. But I did want to start with a few things that I thought were good about the book. One thing that I liked is just simply the novelty of the premise. Like I think I said in another video, what drew me in was actually the novelty of the premise. So the fact that we've got a female traveling itinerant preacher, Methodist preacher, was interesting to me. The fact that almost the entire cast, almost the entire principal cast is not aristocratic, but are simply working people, and they're sort of given real internal worlds that are just as complex as their noble counterparts. Um, I did like the brisk pace. I thought the pace was very good. I thought it was very relaxing to read, and I thought that she keeps the energy up pretty well, though apparently other people don't agree. I also think that the book gets much, much better as it goes along. So, most of my gripes that I'm going to be talking about today are from the first half or even sort of the first 30% of the book. And it's sort of interesting as George Eliot's first foray into writing. You can almost feel her maturing as a writer as you read through the novel. It really improves a lot as it goes along. And when it gets to the end, I really found the end to be very satisfying and even kind of sweet with ample closure. And I really wish most, or maybe more books had this amount of sort of wrapping it up and allowing you to get used to the fact that the story is ending. I always appreciate books that are like that, especially if the book is largely, just sort of a story, an interpersonal story. I really like having that level of wrap up. So those are the things I liked. But I don't want to give her too much credit. I'm very much against grading on a curve just because someone is famous. And I know George Eliot is very, very famous, particularly for Middlemarch and The Mill and the Floss, both of which I haven't read, which I think might be a good thing in this case because I really just want to look at the book itself, not the reputation of the author. I mean, there are lots of writers, and this is why I'm still sort of open to reading more George Eliot. I think a lot of writers have, better and worse pieces. I mean, even with someone like Shakespeare, I really think that Shakespeare has some of the best writing I've ever read. Things that sort of, for me anyway, approach pretty much perfection. But you know, Troilus and Cressida is a bad play. That's just the fact. You know, someone like Salman Rushdie, one of my favorite writers, loved Midnight's Children. He's had a lot of duds too that I think are objectively bad. So that's why I think it's not really like a nail in the coffin for George Eliot for me. I understand that like in any oeuvre, it's very likely that there are going to be some hits and some misses, and maybe sometimes something just sort of presses right on a nerve that someone has, like may have happened for me with this book. And so I'm still perfectly open to the idea that Eliot may have very much matured or done something way, way better in Middlemarch or The Mill and the Floss. I'm entirely open to that idea. But so that we can actually talk about the book, let me get to a quick summary of the plot's setup. I know I have a tendency to go on for way too long, and I already know this review is going to be long, but I have made a little PowerPoint so that we could get through this like little setup right away. And this is not going to be very spoilery. This is just sort of what we get in the first maybe 25% of the book, just to get the story sort of set up. So here's my little PowerPoint. So we've got 5 principal characters in this book. And the first is Arthur Donnithorne. He's heir to the Donnithorne estate, and he's really the only character in the novel who's of noble birth. And he's sort of, he's about to come of age, and his elderly relative, who's not that great of an estate manager, is weak and sickly and probably soon to die. So he's very close to sort of becoming more or less the boss of all the other people in the novel. So he's the only landowner, the only sort of powerful personage in the book. Then we've got the titular character, Adam Bede. He's an artisan and a carpenter. And Adam is just, Adam is the full package. He's hyper competent. He's incredibly hardworking. He's dutiful. He's incredibly good looking. I mean, George Eliot almost can't stop herself talking about his athletic body and his broad shoulders. He's practical. He's even-tempered. He has a strong sense of justice. He's just anything you could want in a good, solid, noble man. The third character we've got is Seth Bede, and as you can see from the photo, he's kind of just a lesser copy of Adam. He hardly gets any real characterization in the book, but you know, he's Adam's little brother. He's also fairly good. He's more meek and mild, and much more given to sort of being sympathetic to their mother and stuff. But his only real defining characteristic is that he's a Methodist. He's a very devout Methodist. And then for the women, we've got Dinah Morris, who's a Methodist preacher. And as you could probably tell from the image I chose, Dinah essentially has no flaws. Yeah, she has kind of I guess a whisper of an internal life at the very end, which we're only allowed to see indirectly. But she's much less realistically drawn than the 3 male characters, all of whom, well, except for Seth, have sort of good and bad qualities. And then lastly, as I zoom through this, we've got Hetty Searle, who, as you can see from my photo, is sort of as close to a villain as you're going to get in this book. She's Dinah's cousin, and until pretty deep into the book, essentially has absolutely no characteristics other than being offensively pretty. George Eliot sort of is very offended by how pretty Hetty is, and that she dares, on top of that, folks, to be aware of it. You should never do that. And so sort of from page 1, Eliot is pretty much on Hetty's case. And, you know, Hetty is vain, and in this book anyway, vanity ranks up there with one of the most unforgivable sins. In fact, we hardly see any other behavior directly described as a sin in the entire book other than sort of vanity and being vain, and this is one of the main themes of the book. And so to move forward here. We've got the 5 characters, and even though it was a wonderful setup, I thought that could have had any number of storylines, particularly I had hoped in exploring Dinah's life, coming to be an itinerant female minister, when that was highly unusual at the time, and I was sort of really interested in what that whole thing might be. You know, did she feel compunction about it, so on. It actually just ends up being kind of a love story, sort of like a love pentagon, or maybe even more like a pentagram, since it doesn't actually go around in a circle, and that sort of becomes the main meat of the story. So the first connection we have here that connects them all is we've got Seth is very interested in Dinah, which makes complete sense because Seth is a Methodist, a devout Methodist, and he's very interested in Dinah. Early on in the first couple of pages or something, he proposes to Dinah, but Dinah turns him down, so it is not reciprocated. Then the next major connection we have, or liaison we have, is Arthur, of course, is very interested in Hetty because I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but Hetty is very beautiful. In fact, that's the only thing we can say about Hetty for much of the book is that she's very beautiful. And but Hetty actually reciprocates Arthur's interest. Arthur and Adam, and in fact all of the main characters, are very handsome. So Arthur is handsome, he's a genteel nobleman, and he sort of fills Hetty's head with dreams of rising above her station and becoming a lady. So Hetty is very interested in Arthur. And then finally coming to Adam. Adam actually is also interested in Hetty. I think most men are interested in Hetty in one way or another, except for Seth. And so Seth sort of doesn't actually know Hetty very well, but he imagines that he has this very deep love for her because she's so beautiful. And then in sort of the early pages, while we're still setting up, we also see a couple of indications that Seth could also sort of be interested in Dinah, but we don't know where exactly that might lead. So all of these characters are sort of tied to one another through their romantic liaisons with one another. Well, not physical liaisons, but, you know, their romantic connections with one another. And so that's kind of the setup, essentially, of the book. And to get to my reaction to the book, there are 2 chapters in like the first third that I found particularly irksome. I mean, it was difficult to sort of forgive the book after this was done. So there's one in which Eliot sort of more or less directly compares Hetty and Dinah to one another in terms of their relative worth. They both live in the same house, and they both sort of go upstairs and do their toilette privately in their respective rooms, and we get this little scene in which we sort of compare what Hetty does when she's alone and what Dinah does when she's alone. And then directly on the heels of that chapter, we get an interruption in the narration in which Eliot speaks directly to us as the author and lays out her theory of sort of novel writing and what she's trying to accomplish in the novel. And I found both of these pretty unbearable. And so I can start with the first one. So in the first one, Hetty sort of goes upstairs, carefully locks her door, pulls out her secret trinkets, which end up being a mirror and a black shawl and some earrings. And she basically, let's keep in mind she's 17 years old. She basically pulls out a mirror, puts the shawl around her shoulders and head or whatever, and tries on her earrings, and she sort of looks in the mirror and admires her shoulders and face and arms, and is sort of dreaming about Arthur, I think, is what she's doing. And then we go to Dinah, and Dinah in her room, of course, isn't looking in the mirror, but she's sort of piously gazing out of the window, thinking only of others. And it's sort of irritating. And it's not just that there's this distasteful comparison between these two women, but I mean, Eliot draws it out as directly as possible. I mean, she even says that one has a higher nature and one has a lower nature. She uses literally those words, those exact words. And the entire thing just sort of lacks a kind of magnanimity, which Eliot is, I think, doubtless aiming at. Because she simply has too much to prove to us as readers that Hetty is bad and Dinah is good. And in fact, at the end of the whole description, lest we be in any doubt, she simply at the end, after Hetty has tried on her clothes or whatever, tacks on, oh yeah, and she didn't like animals or children either. I mean, it's almost at the level of having a movie in which you have the villain kick a dog or kick a puppy or something. She just sort of throws that out there to make sure that you see that Hetty is bad and Dinah is good. And this is kind of, I mean, even before Hetty moves on in her story, this is just sort of how Hetty is treated for the entirety of the novel. So even before Hetty does anything more than dream of a handsome man who flirted with her and literally look in the mirror, Eliot uses words like shallow, trivial, narrow, hard. She even calls her a minx. This is not in quotes. This is how she describes her. And even when her closest relative, Hetty's closest relative, is supposedly describing how much she loves her, she simply calls her a hussy before she's done anything. This was one thing that sort of became a recurring irritation for me, is that Eliot continually sets Hetty up in order to condemn, judge, and belittle her. I mean, who would ever look good compared to Dinah, right? Dinah's a living saint. She only believes in self-abnegation and self-sacrifice is what brings her joy. And Hetty is just sort of acting like in my opinion, a normal human being, so far anyway. But Eliot really wants to show us that she's somehow inherently very bad. Another example is at some point Hetty is walking in the garden with Adam, and Adam pulls out a rose from the garden and he says, oh, Hetty, put this in your frock and you can put it in a glass of water when you get home. And Hetty, it says, she merely takes the flower and puts it in her hair above her ear. And Adam sort of freaks out and says, oh, she has a love of finery. And he demands immediately, as in as much hurry as possible, that she must take it out of her hair. Oh God. And it's just, I mean, I know this is the Victorian period, but come on. This is a little bit, it's just excessive. And so over and over again, sort of with Hetty, every action and thought that she makes is somehow proof of her vanity, her selfishness, her self-absorption, everything she does. And Eliot is able to shower so much more sympathy on all of her other characters. In fact, a lot of times other characters are doing things that aren't really all that different from what Hetty does, but they're sort of forgivable. But when Hetty does it, oh no. And you sort of feel that were Hetty just to sneeze, the narrative would go something like, and she sneezed in order to bring all the attention to herself. And while she was sneezing, she wasn't even thinking of an innocent child that she could be taking care of at that very moment. For Hetty was always thinking of herself. And, if Adam Bede sneezed, it would say something like, Adam sneezed with the strength and manliness of what he was. And she just sort of has this horrible double standard for Hetty. And it's sort of irritating. I think the other thing is, if this were maybe a more modern novel, but also maybe a little bit more nuanced, maybe there would be some admission that this book is one which is very concerned with people's outward appearance, and it sort of admits over and over again that women are entirely judged by their appearance. And so it seems to me that vanity is a perfectly rational response in a world in which everything about you is judged according to what you look like. And I think there is some, between the lines, there is some recognition of that, because I think that's why between the lines Eliot finds it so incredibly important that women never be aware of their beauty, or at least not show any awareness of it, and you must be very humble and all the time and have no pride whatsoever, and it's very important that women act in this particular way because otherwise they would have some awareness of their status, and that could be very threatening. But Eliot really has no sympathy to spare for Hetty, even as she is very indulgent of some other characters who who also do questionable things. And meanwhile, in the other room where Dinah is, she's just too perfect to really have an internal world. Over and over again throughout the book, characters comment that Dinah is not like other girls, like almost literally in those words. She's not like other girls. And, you know, I would have liked to have known how Dinah felt about living so unconventionally, which in a way could itself be seen as a type of egotism or vanity, but that's never explored because we never get to explore Dinah really as a person. In fact, she disappears for almost the entire novel. She's sort of there at the beginning and then she appears again at the end, and she's mostly away, and I think that's because she's such an unrealistic character that she couldn't possibly carry any real part of the story on her own. And I actually, I had a note here. One of my funnier notes that I wrote down that I just wanted to share was at some point in the novel, I simply wrote down, does Dinah do anything in her preaching except yell at hot girls? Because that seems to be largely what Dinah's business is telling girls to be humble and stop thinking about yourself so much. And given her working class audience, I'm surprised that there aren't more pressing things that she needs to work on, such as gambling or drinking problems or something, but mostly she seems to be shown yelling at girls for being too vain. So much of the book could kind of be summarized as Dinah good, Hetty bad, and everyone else kind of gets more three-dimensional personalities. And yeah, I mean, she very easily forgives those who are beguiled by Hetty, but not the very one who does the beguiling, even as she is pretty much just as innocent and naive, if not more so, than the ones who are beguiled. And so that was just really something sticking in my craw. And yeah, I suppose if you wanted to be more charitable to Eliot than I'm being, you would say, okay, well, the complexity of Hetty is that she's not just an outright villain. She doesn't wish people harm. She's just sort of thoughtless and naive. But the amount of condemnation that Eliot rains down on her is quite unfair, and sort of it's just this intrusion into the text that sort of it's distracting and it's poor writing in my opinion. And that sort of gets me to the second part that I didn't really like, which is I just refer to as the lecture, which is when Eliot pauses the narrative to speak directly to us, the reader. And this was by far my least favorite part of the book. In fact, I'd go so far as to say it was insufferable. I had a hard time reading this. So Eliot makes a number of claims about what she hopes to achieve in her novel. And I think this is why I had such a problem with the book, because in my opinion, she sets up these standards, and then the book itself doesn't come even close to meeting these standards. It doesn't succeed by its own standard. And that kind of drives me crazy. I mean, there's almost it's almost unbelievable how juxtaposed her goals are to her immediate disregard of those goals. And so much of my astonishment and annoyance with this book is how hypocritical it seemed to be to me. So I basically got 3 gripes with it, with the lecture, as I call it. It's contradictory, it's didactic, and it's self-congratulatory. And reflecting on my very strong response to this book once I finished it, I think it's the didacticism that really gave me a really strong negative response to this book. I do not like being told what to think. I don't like being patronized, and I don't like being instructed. And that's a lot of what I got from George Eliot in this book. And I think it was just very difficult for me to recover from that, even as it sort of, as I said, gets better later in the book. But I have a very negative, it sort of like gets my hackles up, and I become very contrarian when someone starts telling me what I should think. And you sort of get this unbearable speech, and she sort of she sets out that she's going to, first of all, one of the things she says is that she's going to write with realism. So she wants to write real people and real three-dimensional complex people who are mixes of good and bad. But she sets it up in this sort of irritating way where she's sort of imputing to us these naive and very stupid views. She'll say something like, perhaps you want to see heroes and villains, but dear reader, I want to write of people with twisted noses and protruding lips, except all of my characters are extremely good looking, and I didn't include even one bad looking character. But, dear reader, I want to write of the little people, the people who are like grown-up children or like beasts, which is literally the vocabulary I use to talk about people trying to learn to read in their adulthood. And dear reader, we should love people for what they are, their flaws included, for no person is all the way bad or all the way good, except for Hetty, that little tramp. She's terrible. and it's not only sort of contradictory, but it's sort of this simplistic third grade morality that it's already difficult medicine to take, having someone sort of treat you like you're a child and sort of stupid, but also the fact that it's a lesson that nobody really needed to learn. I mean, the idea of the beautiful but dangerous or immoral woman is not one which is unknown to Western literature. I mean, starting with Adam and Eve onward, I think it's one of the most well-worn tropes in all of Western literature, but somehow George Eliot acts like we're going to be we're just going to be flabbergasted by the groundbreaking originality of this idea. Pretty women can sometimes be bad people. My God. And the other thing is she goes on this little harangue before Hetty has had any chance to act as well. And so she's sort of continually pulling the rug out from under Hetty, and everything she does is sort of somehow offensive. And it just... Yeah, I've written here in my notes that it just really gets my goat that she has no respect for the audience's intelligence, and the whole thing just ends up being unbearably moralizing. In the second half of the book, I've written here that she stops lecturing, but she's still teaching. So she stops talking to us directly quite so much, which in itself is not something I hate. Actually, I find that amusing a lot of the time. Like, when Trollope does it, it's pretty funny. But, she still has this sort of bee in her bonnet, which I think really gets in the way of her stated goal of realism, because when you're trying to teach people a lesson, it's very difficult to allow people to act realistically when you need things to sort of turn out in a certain way and show us a certain moral. So I feel like she's sort of dishonest, because she claims she's very self-congratulatory about it too, but she's sort of patting herself on the back and saying, I, dear reader, I want to show you what it is, real people. And she's completely dishonest because she really wants to tell us something about morality and about how women should act and how men should act, right? And so I found that sort of irritating. But okay, moving right along into the second half of the book, it's much better. She focuses on other characters other than Hetty. We learn a lot more about Arthur. Arthur is much more of a realistic person who has good things and bad things. He's a really nice guy. But also a bit weak-willed. He's indecisive. He's sort of a people pleaser. He cares too much about what other people think. He is himself sort of vain, but since he's a guy, it doesn't matter nearly as much, and we can forgive him. And so we follow Hetty and Arthur as they have an affair. Hetty genuinely thinks that maybe Arthur will marry her. For Arthur, it's always a trifling affair. I actually kind of grew to pity Hetty while she's dreaming of a better life that she might actually like, since she hates her life on the farm so much. And it is actually kind of a very tragic and sad image that she is sort of, her head is filled with these dreams that we the audience know will never ever come true. But Eliot can't bring herself to spare any sympathy for Hetty until she's punished the little harlot, which we'll get to in a bit. So Hetty and Arthur are caught in their affair by Adam. Adam forces Arthur to cut off the affair. Arthur leaves to go to the military. And so Hetty is very disappointed, but eventually, through her hardness, as George Eliot calls it, so Hetty is not very emotionally moved by things, which is one of George Eliot's continual criticisms of her. Hetty agrees to get engaged to Adam, mostly just because she wants to change and because Adam really likes her. And all things seem to be going well. Oh, I will insert a spoiler. I'll insert a spoiler alert. But anyway, spoiler for the end of the book. All things seem to be going well until Hetty just becomes very upset and runs away from Adam and tries to go find Arthur. So she runs off on her own. She's never even she's a provincial girl. She's never really been on her own before. She runs off, tries to find Arthur, can't find him. And she's sort of suffering on the streets. She loses all her money, and Eliot spares no effort in telling us that she wished she could go back and she needed to be more grateful and blah, blah, blah. Okay. At length, much later, we learn that Hetty was actually pregnant on the road, and that's why she was so desperate to find Arthur. She gives birth, and she tries to expose the baby, and it's all found out. Hetty is found guilty at trial, and then there's this whole wind up to how she's going to be put to death. She's saved at the last second by a reprieve from Arthur, pulled some strings or whatever, and she's transported, which I believe means she was just sent to like a penal colony or something, maybe even Australia. And don't worry for all those who want the story to have its moral completion. She does die at the end, as she must, as any woman who has premarital sex must in these stories. And Arthur leaves for several years as a kind of self-inflicted punishment. And then at the end, it's actually sort of a long section that's fairly nice and sort of gives you time to say goodbye to the characters. We see Adam and Dinah 18 months later, and Adam realizes that he should marry Dinah, and so we sort of follow them in the lead up to their marriage. So Adam marries Dinah, and they live happily ever after, Adam and Dinah. We don't care about the others. No, we do. Arthur sort of comes back, but we don't care about Hetty. Hetty's dead in a ditch or whatever. We don't care about Hetty. So the reason I even bothered going over the rest of it is just because, I mean, you can't even take the baby stuff seriously. It kind of comes from out of nowhere. It's melodramatic. The whole thing kind of feels like a DARE campaign from the 90s. Eliot had it in for Hetty all along, and then surprise, surprise, it turns out that the whole situation turns out as terribly as possible for Hetty, and things turn out as well as possible for Dinah. And watch out, girls, it starts out with flowers in your hair, and before you know it, you're a baby murderer, right? It's just too much for me. And the ending's not just about, I felt that the ending wasn't just about Adam sort of finding happiness finally after all this suffering that he goes through with Hetty, but it's also sort of this moral lesson that the man who's sort of the symbolic chooser, the witness, the judger of these two girls' characters, eventually chooses the right girl, and so he gets the correct woman, and so that sort of irritated me. So I guess I really don't like lessons, and I especially don't like lessons that are lessons that any adult would be aware of. I mean, it really is as simple as people's appearances sometimes belie their real character. That's the sort of ultimate theme of the book. And so I wrote here, if you want a story about a woman who falls due to her good looks, read Moll Flanders. Fantastic book. If you want a story about how appearances may belie the depths of the inner spirit, read Jane Eyre. Wonderful book. If you want a story about characters who are still lovable despite their flaws, read Anthony Trollope. And if you just kind of hate pretty women, but you're trying desperately to intellectualize it so it doesn't feel that petty, read Adam Bede. And for anyone who is going to criticize me and say that I'm judging Adam Bede by standards that are far too modern, remember Moll Flanders is written in 1722, Jane Eyre is written in 1847. Anthony Trollope is, all over the latter part of the 19th century, and Adam Bede is 1859. So I really feel that George Eliot has absolutely no excuse for writing something this sort of morally simplistic and didactic. But anyway, I think my main lesson that I've taken from this is that I need to stop reading minor works by great authors, because this is like the third time this has happened to me that I've picked up sort of like a B-side of a famous writer and not liked it. And I think that's why I'm having so much trouble sort of finding stuff that I like lately. So I'm going to stop reading. From now on, when I read something by a famous writer, I'm going to pick their most famous piece of writing. Um, and yeah, I think that's sort of all I had to say about that. I know I didn't really touch on the other characters as much as I had planned to. I think the other characters are much better than Dinah and Hetty. Um, and I can see how they have much more complex characterization than Dinah and Hetty, but I frankly didn't think it was anything particularly special. I mean, she does a competent job, but I didn't feel that she had any more psychological insight than any number of writers from her time and earlier and after. So that's sort of my take on Adam Bede. I'm sorry if this has ruffled some feathers. But, just remember that I am a complete weirdo when it comes to this. And most people love this book. So if you do too, that's great. If you're planning on reading it, I think you should still read it. It's likely you'll like it and you'll think, oh, what was that? What was Elizabeth talking about? She was being completely unfair to George Eliot. But that was just my response. And I hope it was at least a little bit entertaining or made a little bit of sense to you. So I'll see you guys in the next one. And I hope next time I'll have a book that I can speak more highly of. So I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.